Story number 1, closing procedure. I was halfway through the closing checklist when I noticed him still in the plumbing aisle. It was 7:50, 2 in the evening. We'd made the final announcement at 7:30, 5, the usual calm voice over the intercom that most people hear as their cue to head toward the registers. The spring thunderstorm outside had been building all afternoon, and the windows at the front of the store were dark with it now, the kind of darkness that makes fluorescent lighting feel less like brightness and more like a barrier against something. He was alone back there, comparing 2 boxes of PX tubing. I could see him from where I stood near the paint section, and there was nothing unusual about the way he was holding them, turning them over, reading the specifications. Just a customer being thorough. I told myself that. I was good at the checklist, at the protocol. 8 years as assistant manager meant I knew the rhythm of closing, and part of that rhythm was being patient with the stragglers. I walked back to him. He was maybe mid-50s, wearing a polo shirt and jeans, the kind of unremarkable appearance that wouldn't stick with you in a crowd. He looked up as I approached, and he smiled. "We're actually closed now," I said, keeping my voice level and polite. "We made the announcement at 7:35. "Oh, I know, I'm sorry," he said, setting the boxes down. I just couldn't decide. I'm doing some work on my house, and I wanted to make sure I got the right gauge. He glanced at the boxes again, then back at me. "Quick question, though. Do you know which shift has the most experienced staff? I might need some advice on installation, and I'd rather talk to someone who really knows their stuff." It was a reasonable question. I answered it. Mentioned that Tom usually works mornings and is good with plumbing questions. I didn't think about why he was asking. "And what time does he usually come in?" He continued, already moving toward the front of the store. I followed him. "Around 6 in the morning," I said. "But you could always call and ask for him by name." "Does the back loading dock stay unlocked overnight?" he asked, almost casually, as we passed through the garden supplies section. "I'm asking because I might need to return something if the installation doesn't work out, and I was wondering if there's a way to do that without waiting for regular hours." "No. Everything's locked up after closing," I said. My tone was still pleasant, but something small had shifted in my chest. Not alarm exactly, just a tightness. "You'd have to come back during business hours." He nodded, and as we walked, he kept glancing at the emergency exit signs. There were 4 of them in the store, positioned at regular intervals along the back wall and near the stockroom. He seemed to be counting them, or maybe just noting their locations. I noticed because I was starting to pay attention now, the way you do when something small begins to feel less small. We reached the front doors. I unlocked the first one, the glass door that opened onto the parking lot, where the storm was really starting to pick up now, the wind pushing rain sideways across the asphalt. He stepped halfway through, and then he stopped. "Actually," he said, turning back to me with that same calm expression, "I think I left my wallet near the lumber section. I remember setting it down when I was looking at some 2x4s earlier. Could I just grab it real quick? I should have offered to look for it myself." That was the protocol. But he was already moving past me, walking back into the store with a kind of purposeful stride that made my stomach tighten. He wasn't wandering. He knew where he was going. "I'll find it for you." I called after him, but he didn't slow down. He moved through the main floor toward the back of the store, and I followed, my pace quickening. The fluorescent lights seemed louder now, That constant humming that you usually tune out, but suddenly becomes all you can hear. The stockroom door was ahead of him, the employee. Only entrance that required a key card to open from the outside, but could be pushed from within. He reached it and tried the handle. It was locked. Of course it was locked. I always locked it during closing. But he tried it anyway, and when it didn't give, he turned to face me. We were about 15 feet apart in the narrow hallway between the lumber section and the stockroom entrance. The emergency exit sign glowed red above his head. His expression hadn't changed. He was still calm, still composed, but something in his eyes had shifted, not threatening exactly, just present. Like he'd been wearing a mask and had finally let it slip, and what was underneath was just a simple acknowledgement that we both knew what was happening now. I backed away. My hand was already moving toward my pocket where my phone was, but I didn't take my eyes off him. "I'm calling the police," I said. My voice sounded strange to me, higher than usual. He didn't move. He just watched me, and I turned and walked quickly toward the manager's office, which was on the other side of the stockroom, accessible from the main floor through a separate door near the customer service desk. My legs felt like they weren't quite mine. I was moving fast now, not quite running but close to it, and I could hear his footsteps behind me, not running either but steady, following. I reached the office door, unlocked it with my key card, and stepped inside. The office was small, maybe 12 feet by 10, with a desk, a filing cabinet, and a wall of monitors showing the security feeds from throughout the store. I locked the door behind me and immediately pressed the silent alarm button mounted under the desk. It was a small red button, something I'd pressed during training 5 years ago, but never in an actual situation. It was supposed to alert the police station directly. His footsteps stopped in the hallway outside. I could hear him trying other doors, methodically working his way along the wall, the stockroom door, the break room door, the supply closet, testing each one, his hand on each handle, pulling gently as if he was just making sure they were secure, as if he had all the time in the world. I sat in the office chair and watched the monitors. I could see him on the feed from the hallway camera, moving from door to door with that same calm, unhurried pace. He wasn't panicked. He wasn't angry. He was just checking, just verifying what he already seemed to know about the layout of the building. The police arrived at 8:04 in the evening. I heard the sirens first, then the sound of cars pulling into the parking lot, then officers moving through the front entrance that I'd unlocked for him. They found the store empty. He was gone. They searched the building, checked the exits, found nothing. When they reviewed the security footage with me, they showed me what the cameras had captured. For 20 minutes after the police entered the building, he was still inside, testing the emergency exits, checking the loading dock door, walking through the stockroom, examining the shelves and the layout, never attempting to leave through the front entrance, never attempting to leave at all until, finally, he just walked out through one of the emergency exits he'd been testing, setting off the alarm, and disappeared into the storm. The police said he was probably just casing the place, looking for something to steal. They filed a report. They increased patrols in the area. But they didn't find him, and I never found out what he was really looking for, or why he needed to know so much about how to move through the building when no one was watching. I still work at the store. I still close on Thursdays. But now when I lock up, I check the stockroom door 3 times instead of once, and I notice every customer who asks about the staff schedule or lingers too long near the exits. Sometimes I wonder if he ever came back, if he's been back multiple times, if I just didn't notice because I wasn't paying attention. I don't know. I probably never will. Story number 2, tire rotation. I dropped my Subaru off at Mountain View Tire and brake at 4:30 in the afternoon. The fog was already moving in through the pines, that thick Montana fog that makes everything feel closer than it is. I'd driven up from Missoula that morning for client meetings, and I needed new tires before heading back. The shop was small, the kind of place that had been there for 20 years and would probably be there for 20 more. 2 bays, a waiting room with old magazines, a coffee maker that looked like it had been running since the 90s. The mechanic, Dale, called me back about 20 minutes later. He was a thin guy, maybe 50, with grease under his fingernails that didn't come off. He showed me the brake lines under my car. They were corroded, he said. Bad. Really bad. He pointed at the rust with a wrench, and I could see what he meant. The metal was flaking, discolored. He said if I drove it like that, the brakes could fail. Completely fail. I believed him. I drive 300 miles a week for work, and I'm not an idiot about car maintenance. Corroded brake lines are serious. I told him to do the work overnight. I'd stay at the motel and pick it up in the morning. Ray, the owner, came out of the office. He was older than Dale, maybe mid-60s, with the same weathered look. He said he'd drive me to the Pine Ridge Motel, just 6 miles down the road. No problem. He'd drop me off. I could grab dinner, get some rest. He'd have the car ready by 9 in the morning. While Ray was finishing some paperwork, I waited in the waiting room. The door to the garage bays was closed, but I could smell something. Burning rubber, sharp and acrid. The kind of smell you get when tires are being worked on hard or when something's overheating. I looked at the closed door. No sound of work. No voices. Just that smell. I tried to call a rideshare. I wanted to be independent about it, didn't want to impose on Ray. But my phone showed no signal. I tried again. Nothing. I walked to the window. 1 bar. I tried to make the call anyway. It wouldn't go through. Ray came out and asked if I needed anything. I said I was trying to get a rideshare, but the signal was bad. He nodded like he'd expected that. He said the cell service out here was terrible. Always had been. He'd drive me himself. No trouble at all. Something in the way he said it made me pause. Not anything he did, just the certainty of it. Like he'd already decided. I told him okay, thanks. I'd just wait for him to grab his keys. He went back into the office. I heard him talking to Dale, but I couldn't make out the words. Then I heard the waiting room door lock. From the outside. The sound of a deadbolt sliding home. I stared at the door for maybe 3 seconds. Then I walked to it and tried the handle. Locked. I could see through the small window in the door. Ray and Dale were standing by my Subaru, about 30 feet away in the lot. They were talking. And they were both looking back at the building. At the waiting room where I was standing. My heart rate went up. I told myself it was nothing. Maybe they locked the door by habit. Maybe they didn't want me wandering around the garage. Maybe the lock was just broken and happened to engage. I tried the front door. Bolted from the outside too. I went to the bathroom. It was small old, with a single window about 2 feet square. The frame was painted shut, but the window itself opened outward. I pushed it and it creaked open. Outside was a small alley between the shop and the neighboring building, and beyond that, the road disappearing into fog. I didn't think about it much. I just did it. I climbed through the window. The frame caught my arm on the way out. tore the skin on my bicep. I felt it, but didn't really process the pain. I dropped onto the gravel outside and started walking. The fog had gotten thicker. I could see maybe 50 feet ahead before everything dissolved into gray. I didn't look back. I just walked. My arm was bleeding. I could feel it running down to my elbow. I kept walking. It took me almost an hour to reach the gas station. 3 miles, the clerk told me later. I must have walked it in 45 minutes, moving fast. The gas station was bright and normal and full of people. I bought a bottle of water and asked about the motel. The clerk said there was one just down the road. The Peenwood, not the Peeneridge. I'd gotten the name wrong. I got a room there. I called Mountain View and left a message saying I'd changed my mind. I'd pick up the car in the morning. I didn't sleep much. I kept thinking about Ray and Dale standing in the lot, looking back at the building. I kept thinking about that burning rubber smell. I kept thinking about the locked doors. The next morning, I called a tow truck to take me back to the shop. I was going to get my car and figure out what had happened. Maybe there was nothing. Maybe I panicked over nothing. My Subaru was in the lot, parked exactly where I'd left it. No damage. The keys were in the drop box. The paperwork was on the seat. The brake lines had been replaced. Everything looked fine. I checked the odometer. It read 47 miles more than it had yesterday. I'd driven it maybe 2 miles to the shop. Ray was supposed to drive me 6 miles to the motel. That was 8 miles. 47 miles meant they'd driven it somewhere far, and they'd brought it back. The shop was locked. No one answered the phone. I called the county. The address was registered to Ray Hutchins, but he had no forwarding number, no secondary contact. The business license had been inactive for 6 months. The county said they'd been trying to reach him about unpaid property taxes. I drove away in my car with the new brake lines, and I haven't been back to that town since. I don't know what they were doing with my car. I don't know where they took it. I don't know why they locked me in that room, or why they wanted me to go with them to the motel, or what that burning rubber smell was. But I think about those 47 miles. I think about it a lot. Story number 3, dental emergency. I'd been in Phoenix for 3 weeks. The apartment was fine, the job was fine, everything was fine except I didn't know anyone yet. That's the only reason I was relieved when the dental office called me back on a Saturday morning. A cracked molar. I'd mentioned it to my regular dentist in California before the move, and somehow the referral had made it here. Someone could see me that afternoon. The strip mall was on the outskirts, past the newer developments, in one of those older commercial areas where the buildings look tired and the parking lot has too much space. I found the dental office easily enough, clean, professional. The kind of place that probably does good work. The receptionist was a woman in her 50s, dark hair, wearing the kind of bright scrubs that are supposed to make you feel safe. She smiled when I came in. She had me fill out the standard forms, asked the standard questions. Insurance, allergies, medications. Then she asked if anyone knew I was here today. I remember thinking that was a little odd. Not unusual, just the kind of question that makes you pause for a second. I told her no, not really. I'd texted my mom that morning about the appointment, but we hadn't talked. I didn't have friends here yet. She nodded and typed something into the computer. Then she stood up very quickly, grabbed her purse from under the desk, didn't say anything, just walked to the front door, unlocked it, and left, locked it again behind her. I heard the lock click. I sat there for maybe 10 seconds, trying to figure out if I'd done something wrong, if I'd said something that offended her. But that didn't make sense. I told myself it was probably a standard thing. Security protocol for weekend appointments with limited staff. The dentist would come out and explain it. Everything was fine. The dentist came out about 2 minutes later. Late 40s, salt and pepper hair, wearing a white coat that was very clean. He smiled. He introduced himself. His name was David. He seemed professional. He seemed normal. He brought me back to the exam room and had me sit in the chair. The room smelled like every dental office I'd ever been in. Antiseptic, mint, rubber. He began the examination, looking at the cracked tooth, asking me how long it had been bothering me, whether I'd had pain. Standard questions. His hands were steady. He seemed competent. But then he started talking about the location, how quiet it was on weekends, how most of the other businesses in the strip mall closed early on Saturdays, how it was nice, actually, being so isolated. He said it like he was making conversation, like it was nothing. I told myself I was being paranoid. He asked again if my family knew where I was. More directly this time. I said my mom knew I had an appointment, but I didn't give her the address. I'd only been in Phoenix 3 weeks. I didn't have a dentist yet. I'd found this place online. He nodded slowly, and I watched his eyes move to the doorway behind me. That's when I noticed the assistant. I hadn't heard her come in. She was standing in the doorway, not moving, just standing there. She was younger than the receptionist, maybe mid-30s, with blonde hair pulled back tight. She was looking at the dentist. He was looking at her. They exchanged something, not words, just a look. I felt my stomach tighten. The dentist turned back to me and said we should do some sedation to help me relax. He was already preparing a syringe. Clear liquid. I hadn't consented to sedation. I'd never discussed sedation. I told him no. I said I was fine without it. I tried to stand up. The assistant moved into the doorway completely, blocking it. I remember my heart rate changing. I could hear it. The dentist was still holding the syringe. He was explaining that it would just help me relax, that it was perfectly safe, that I should trust him. His voice was very calm, very reasonable. He took a step closer. I kicked the instrument tray. It was right next to the chair, and I just kicked it. Hard. It went into his legs, and he stumbled backward, and I shoved past the assistant. She grabbed my arm, but I pulled away and ran. The hallway was long. There was a door at the end with a red emergency exit sign. I could hear the dentist behind me and the assistant, but I was already moving. I hit the bar on the emergency exit door, and the fire alarm started screaming through the entire building. Loud, overwhelming, good. I ran into the parking lot. My car was parked in front, but I didn't go to it. I flagged down a couple in a sedan who were leaving the strip mall. They took one look at me and let me in. The woman asked what was wrong. I told her to call the police. The police arrived in about 8 minutes. 2 officers. They went into the dental office while I sat in the couple's car with the air conditioning running. The officers came back out after about 15 minutes. They said the dentist and his assistant had already left. The office was empty, but they'd found something. One of the officers showed me the appointment book. He opened it to a page and pointed to my name, my full name, my new address in Phoenix. And next to it, in handwriting, the notation, No Local KCS. The date was written above it. 3 months earlier, before I'd ever moved to Phoenix, before I'd ever called for an appointment. I don't remember what I said. I remember the officer's face. He was looking at the book like he was trying to understand it too. Like it didn't make sense. Like something had gone very wrong in a way, That wasn't supposed to be possible. They're still looking for them, the dentist and the assistant. I gave a description. I answered questions. I told them everything I could remember. The police said they'd found other things in the office. Files. Photographs. But they didn't tell me what was in them. I moved apartments 2 days later. I'm not in Phoenix anymore. I'm back in California. I work from home now. I don't go out much. Sometimes I think about how long they'd been planning it. How they'd written my name down 3 months before I existed in their world. How they'd known I would come. How they'd known I'd be alone. I still don't know how they